Nipa gunle namdul shing yende gunge genpa bo simchen gunge nyen chekbo tamje kenla gu chanse omen jege nge bodane dusum sange gunge ngowo nye rasim chego ngosum denzembe Save lame shabla so wande dambiche nyamsul lembe kulung sangpo ngechung ki semba janchub ki semdang tini dambiche chalwe ki peyin tinzu samshimbe koni gato dang dembe dambiche nyamsul lembar shus.
When practicing the precious, sublime Dharma, one's motivation should be excellent in that it consists of renunciation and bodhicitta, as well as giving thought to how lucky and how fortunate one is and all the benefits that come with having met with the Dharma. Really finding a lot of joy and inspiration in having met with the Dharma. And so with that motivation, with that frame of mind, please practice.
Ansuta lam nyamsu lembe ki rimba ta lamrim sanamido ta lam nyamsu lembe lendang ki gorim di kandichini tini doku gre sini deshu pikabre ta dela khasa dunsen namba ngayi benani nganzu tandata shiba lamdu ani manor matuwe nyamsu lembe lendang di kandis nyamsu lengu gre sini deshu pikabre.
So now we're talking about the path and practicing entering into the path. And with that comes learning about the stages of the path, the process, one's progress along the path. We call this lamrim in Tibetan. It essentially means the stages of practice, the stages of the path. And within that, we talk about the steps. We could say the chronological steps and stages that one has to take, one after the other, in order to practice and go along the path. And so this is what we mean by practicing the path, engaging with the path. And so this is what we're talking about now in these classes. And now we've reached there's 5 main topics that we're trying to hit, and we've gone through the first 3, and now we're on to the 4th one, and that is how do we actually practice the unerring, correct, authentic path. So that's where we are now.
Nachidang anzu lamji rimba dinzu shiye di nega chimbore nyamlin jebala penang aranzu sajachila dogu goya na ma dewe ke ngon la ani sacha di chok kawale yoba ani sacha di ki chik chase dangse dinzu kande yinba ani delang anzu dati kare kare chiku goya ba chok kawala dogu goya ba 튕겐 당 가긴 가리여바 차상디 수수 야보 하고베 거니 사제들 침바이나 아니 강에 매바 바치 매바 교부 지니 도사게 사제들 랩투 걸어봐 다 된데 가양 하마고 와지니 되니 즉 초절초절을 침바이나 되니 람갈라 강에 망버 테세기래라 강에 테베 값은 가나서 동린 제시기 말해 아주 다리제요 말봐 배낭한주 강다고 즉 자꾸고요나 당번이 거지 트레이닝 망부 제고도 와 디샤상 제니 침바이네 자도 그러와 근데 가양 마인바니 즉소서 셰르파 메바제 안주 가르쳐 그러지 자베 메캅슬라 acclimatization 세로와 딘저이 가양 메바진 람상 남가래 규도바 나시진 규샤반데 냥가서 그러와 네 능아란서에 journey to enlightenment ni dela lamgi rimba shedi 내가 사고 차겨래 딘디다 당분이 냠레 마제병원라 따와 가래임바 곰바 가래임바 쮸바 가래임바 dela 가진 가래 용시그레스 용베가스네 칸데스 돈렌 제고 그래서 대샤상등 아주 다릭 제들라더니 람림라 로정장 선다 되는 아주 쉬운 데로 로정장 거래
So the stages of the path are we really need to know what those are. It's extremely important. This is something that we really need to study and have in mind when engaging with the practice. For example, it's like going somewhere. You're planning a journey, and before setting out on your journey, you have to first know where you're going. What direction do I set off on? Once I'm there and while I'm traveling, what's the climate like? What kind of things do I need to prepare to take with me? And what are the possible dangers of going? What are the things that I can do to make my journey more safe? What are the things to look out for? What are the things to look forward to? So these are all really important things, because without them, there's the danger of finding a lot of coming into contact with a lot of obstacles, a lot of barriers. But if we prepare, then we can get there without that. We can get there safely and quickly without any obstacles in our way. And so, but if we don't know that, it makes our journey very difficult. Having not prepared beforehand, before setting out on our journey. For example, climbing a snow mountain is a difficult task and requires a lot of training. There's a lot of preparation that goes in to before actually setting off on that journey. It's not like you just kind of go without thinking ahead, right? We don't. If we just said, "Oh, I'm going to go climb that snow mountain," we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble because we haven't acclimated ourselves to the process of climbing a snow mountain, right? We don't have the proper tools or the proper guides, etc. And so there's a lot of danger if we don't first prepare. So this is our journey to enlightenment, right? So it includes the same preparation, the same necessity of preparing and really before setting off, knowing what's entailed, what this journey entails, right? And that includes, when it comes to the practice, what is the view? What is the meditation? What is the conduct? And what are the certain dangers or faults that come with this journey? And so we have to know what they are. We have to face them face to face, and we have to be prepared. And so when we talk about the stages of the path, in this when we're talking about in this current context of what the stages are and how do we engage with them, this is what we mean. This is what we mean by preparing and knowing what what we have to face.
당아주 너디나 람지 림베콜라 럽정자에디 알아서 있는지 당아주 남기 지 프로젝트 첨부지 제고가나 프로젝트 되게 당부지 vision ki blueprint ho chung ba ti ko wa ti mena tene nga zo proceed che tu mar ba de na shin chi da nga zo nyamlen che be ke ngon la tene ta thesam komsum na to ba che be ka su la tene nga zo di the blueprint ya ko chi tempo chi ta je mang ba chi ta ne ba ya ko chi su go ra de da bu chi den de yin de nga zo Sheda ta lo mangba chige ring la tini penna shechin da we no lo mangba chikali kyam ta ge ba kimsin tini re so ki lamga di ni dosa da norsa kare yim ba ti seba ha ko wa ta tini tanga ju chege she ba no uma dang ta se ge ba wi dang ta se ge ba wi di to ko sa yim ba tang 타디 너세게 람카 망고 여바든 저 세브 학업에 제들라더니 쟁이 예와 망고 제기 샤네다 아주 저바 망고 지게 하네더니 럽존 장고에 김센테 들라 도드거래 오마나 시친데죠
So what do I mean by this? In brief, what I'm saying is that these stages of the path need to be studied. We have to familiarize ourselves with what they are, and it's almost like we're starting a project, a very large project, and we have to have some forward vision of what that project is and how to accomplish it. Essentially, we need the blueprints, the blueprints for our entire project. We need to have those well-checked, very, very precise blueprints for how we're going to set off and accomplish our project. Without it, it's essentially impossible to begin the project, to proceed and be successful in the project. So beforehand, before practicing, we have to study, we have to reflect, and then we can go ahead and engage in meditation. So this study, this listening to the teachings is what we mean by collecting ourselves and preparing our blueprints for the project. And we see that in the Shedra, in the monastic Shedra, or any Dharma Shedra, Dharma University of higher education. There's so many years are spent in this college of the Dharma, and what they teach is where we're supposed to go and the possible dangers. And when say we can talk about it from using the terminology of the Dharma, and we have to know the difference between the middle way versus the extremes. The middle way, the center of the path is where we need to go. The extremes of either veering off to the right or left in any of the extremes are the possible dangers, places that we can go wrong. And in order to learn those, within the context of the Shedra, there's many definitions that we have to memorize. There's many divisions of those definitions, etc. And it's those things that we debate for so many years to really pin down and have certainty of what the path is and the possible dangers of the path, or possible dangers of veering off the path, so to say. And so within the context of, say, Madhyamaka and Prajnaparamita teachings, this is extremely important, and this is what we spend so much of our time studying.
Ta ina yang Anke chambuchik di so namju sekirwa namju the idea of enlightenment and the Dharma is interesting, but actual process is boring. And maybe ngazu manchewa di tangbo idea ne gochu pe excited dawacha ani process la leb yonde sama manchewa da kale tanyam da shasha garwa labor to tekwa chombo kapsula da tozu ji mikpa chombo tundu chombo samba gyache stang dila ngazu tekwa chombo slabra the idea the be shiwiji karasa whatever 닝제보다 붙이지 아니 프로세스 강 레비도 사마드니 배 보링 다와 자소는데 용입니다 와 당원이 지나 보링 요 말에 다 가르레스나 it will become actually more interesting when you practice process 이내 안당 아주 고죽입니다 와 디칼리 디레 그냥 아주 그래 고죽에 되게 좋거든 와 근데 고죽나 process 거라면 it will become more and more interesting. But it seems boring at the first level.
So this is a really important thing to think about, because normally when we think about enlightenment, the idea of enlightenment sounds really nice, but when we actually engage in what the necessary process, the actual practice of leading that which leads to enlightenment, it's we find it actually quite boring. The idea is so exciting. I mean, it's such a nice and kind of beautiful idea, especially within the context of the Mahayana. The Mahayana, we have such a vast vision, as well as it requires great diligence and zeal, and a very vast and grand perspective, and maybe we could say motivation. So from that perspective, it's the whole idea of enlightenment sounds like a great thing to do, a great idea. But then when we actually begin the process, we kind of fall off the wagon, so to say, and we find it kind of boring, and the allure of the idea doesn't help in that. Despite the grand idea, when the process is actually difficult. And why is that? It's because we're just in the beginning. Essentially, we haven't even started, because we haven't actually begun the path. It can seem quite boring, but when we actually do enter into the path, when we actually do begin the path, start the path, it actually becomes incredibly interesting.
Actually, if you really look at closely, there's no more interesting thing that try to understand yourself, and there's no you can think about other objects, about moon, sun, planets, Big Bang, all these things. And it's a very good idea and interesting. But if you really think, ultimately, the exploring yourself is, I think, one of the most interesting thing that you can actually do. So what I'm trying to say is that in order to understand this the path as an actual blueprint, we have to practice. If you don't practice and then just try to imagine it, it will always be a little bit dry, because we will talk about what happens when you reach the first bhumi, and we have no idea, So everything seems irrelevant, because all those Bodhisattvas are so far from you. But then you have to study about them, quite a lengthy actually, if you study Prajna Paramita. But then at the same time, to make sense that, wow, this actually is working as a map, as a blueprint towards my journey, you have to start somewhere and experiment and do some introspection and see, is it true or not? And then when this starts working, you will really feel that, wow, this is like map for me, and it's very helpful. And it will really Tadordina Chö lam to was a gravangarazo Namju Chö di lam chabar jebala Tangazu Nyamlin Titus Majena, Lobjong Zangma Jam Jegi, that is called concept idea that was Maduching as Sowa Dishra Ligmidawa. Then in social toes a jig Lalintani, and so Missina la Kange Teondi, Pechana la Sunsha Peki Penangazuta, Nayondi. Nawa lam the Kesuki Yamne Yorawa. This is Jenna. Only that should be Pentogo, that ding winning a Kanga says on Sambeki, Soas Legrova. Early Shini Chur Lamdos Toa said the Latin, only redu Sambi Nishiki.
We, in summary, right, we have this saying that we need to bring the Dharma to the path, or we have to make the Dharma the path. So what do I mean by that? We have to actually practice. Without practicing actually the path, what we study, what we learn is it's purely just concepts. It's only just in our head. There's really no feeling to it. Because we haven't actually applied ourselves. We haven't applied the Dharma. We haven't really engaged on a very personal level with the Dharma. But when we actually do put it into practice, apply it to our own lives, it's a completely different story. If we run into some kind of difficulty, like saying we get sick, and as the texts say, we have to bring sickness onto the path. But what does that mean, right? When we actually apply the Dharma, even in the context of feeling sick or injured, what have you, when we actually bring the Dharma and apply that Dharma in that very situation, in our own lives, then we see, wow, the Dharma actually benefited me. It really actually cleared away a lot of the suffering that I associate with, say, sickness or other difficulties that I find in my life. And then when that really happens, then you're certain you have no doubt that the Dharma is actually applicable and helpful and beneficial and something to be practiced.
So I used to say that Dharma is useless until you really use it. It doesn't do anything. So be a Dharma practitioner, not a Dharma, what do you call, Dharma hoarder? Hoarder?
Hoarder. Yeah, Dharma hoarder.
Hoarder. Where you keep so many things, never use it. 다도되나 아니 람기 림바든 주 셰디 ngazu 취제가는 내가 좀 해승이 디슈고요. 되니 시에바 잠지 되게 말이 배졌단고 그래. 했으니 되니 신이 오늘 다니게 되니 딘족이 캐줘당 표현도 좀 알아서 오늘에 도사면 내시게 그래. 했으니 디슈고요.
So when we talk about the stages of the path, this is an extremely important thing to take into consideration. What that is, just knowing about the stages and the steps on the path isn't enough. We actually have to use it. We actually have to apply it to our own practice. And so it's what that means is we see the benefits. We see the extraordinary qualities that come with the stages of the path and how to apply them. So this is what we need to really have a lot of confidence in.
드니 최대 배제 당바이나 아주 남기 최기 청이 샤용데 값을라 최세디 동알 세제레스니 청이 샤기로 봐. 그중 오늘에도 삼백이 되니 내시게 그래.
When we actually apply the Dharma, the very definition of the Dharma is that which clears away suffering. When we actually apply the Dharma, then we gain certainty and we have complete trust, and that's exactly what it does. The very definition of the Dharma is that which clears away suffering, and we have confidence in that.
다드니 아주 가장 람기 냠술 렌술들라 도텐당 다 게퍼셔바스 니여레 슝낭라 드니 다 도텐디 좀시다버들라더니 장시 종체 장자 장제스니다 드니 남바 시기 권에더니 아주 냠렌제 고고여레스네 숭바라와.
So the actual way in which we practice the path is taught in a brief way as well as in an extensive way or more elaborate way. Within the context of the more brief presentation of how the way in which one practices the path, we talked about the four we could say categories, or the four things to keep in mind when practicing the path, and that is the basis of purification, the means or methods of purification, what is to be purified, and as well as the result of purification. These four things kind of summarize the path, or how to actually apply the path.
I hope you are following the text here, Mahamudra aspiration. 다더니 아주 단다 Gyud Lama di 내 낭니 지당 드니 Gyud Lama 코랑 낭라 장시 정제 사상 숭여래 이네 양다 내 낭니 쪼디 가래 숭거여서나 당보지도 와 장시디 가래를 했어야 됐다. Gyud Lama에게 나라더니 룽당 리바 빼라 소바 망보더니 상계기 숭샤빙 도든수 나라 콩도네 제전 잠바 공부했다. 대시 개바 시부지 캡샤여래.
So the Uttara Tantra Shastra, the Gyud Lama, within that text, it explains all of these four aspects of practicing the path. The basis of purification, the means of purification, etc. However, among these four, the most pressing issue explained in the Gyud Lama is the first one, the basis of purification. It really focuses on what exactly that is. And it provides many scriptural citations as well as reasonings and rationalities of what that is, all coming from the Buddha himself, found within the sutras, and then commented on and compiled by Maitreya in the Gyud Lama.
당에 단지 슈바나 싱안주 장시디 따와라와 따와단 대바 여대바지래 다 장시디 약바 하마거나 되니 장자당 정제된소 또서 추루거 디인데다 따와디 약보 귤레게베 체들라더니 안주 데콜라다 삼노 망보치 따니더니 로조 망보 장교래.
So the view itself is associated with the basis of purification. So that makes it extremely important. Why is that? If we don't know the view, if we don't know what the basis of purification is essentially, then the means of purification, as well as what we need to be abandoning or what we need to be purifying, we won't be clear on what those means and what it is that needs to be purified. We won't really be clear on what those are, the essence of what those things are. And so if we have a very good idea, if we're pretty certain on what this view is, this view of the basis of purification, then everything else becomes clear. So there's a lot of emphasis put on clarifying this point of the view.
디인데 당안수 네마기 케바딘수 룹덥딘수 근당라더니 따와 값을 망보지 돌랭나여봐 다 저어디 가라줄라지 마노르 마투와당 투산노서 망보지 여디기 여바인데 되니 데콜라 사시 망보 나여라 가샤 망보 나여래 나고 김센데한디래 당가란줄라지 따와 툴나 망보지 툴두고 여바인데 다데 마노르 마투와디 개침부터 쓰니다 델라더니 갸가당 베당 케바당 두바 차장기더니 맞아이는다 가르서 그래 심죽 망고시라 나니더니 나나 줄라다 람 망보도 여러와.
And so it's for this reason that so many of the scholars and Mahasiddhas, great meditation practitioners, they discussed this idea of the view to an incredible extent, because it's by having an unconfused, correct, authentic understanding of the view then leads to a correct understanding of meditation conduct. Everything else along the path of the Dharma. So for that reason, you see the scholars and or you could say these scholar practitioners, they debate on the topic so much. They put so much research into exactly what this view is, this correct view. They refute views that they feel aren't the correct view. They posit and assert their own view, and so they go back and forth to really narrow in and to really refine what it means to have the correct view. Again, because with the correct view, everything else becomes correct. Without the correct view, everything becomes confused and incorrect. So the scholars of India and Tibet, as well as the practitioners, Mahasiddhas, they spent so much time researching this and found it. And not only that, they taught according to this view. They showed the path according to this correct assertion of the view.
다딘데 인도에 가서 줍타테오스 민다와당 택바 민다와당 되니 출루 민다와 여러와 dinzo yang tini gomba tan choba dinzo la chidang de zamki mindawa kanyo mara todang dabu re ta ina yang tozo chi mindawa maang cheba di tawa ni yung gore tini tawa dili shaani shile shaani ta tawa kapsula nga di ta di kebar di kari chini yung gore sana jik denpa dan jik chulpa tini rang mare ina yang sambo tang yung di samala pena ta nganzu Untitled da rangyur se dawa dan rangdong dan shindong se dawa da tene manggo yoro ba kebar yoro ba ngazu nambo sanje dinzu chasang de kar resna lamkha di norsa ni yoro ba norsa mangbo yoro norsa ni yores da takbar tawa dan chebar tawa thani ba norsa lamkha di ni nala dudu da khashegi kar thonggo yoresna chebar tawa di nyinga chedos Di ngazu dil mixe ge chi zadun de che go du de na shin ge tawa chi da nyamlin shuk chum ba chi zadun dang pare pena gomulu da wa cha sha ba ina ba khong ge da mare tak ta dan che da ni ye pe na ne da dang bo gomulu da wa ina ngara zu zo de da tak zin di ngazu Not a charge, those Nika charge those. The Angazuda mix a chick, Zadun check over those soon it, Angazu, and the chick, Mazunam, you somewhat have a soul shop, Uma said. That the Ganashin, Jesun Jamba Gomba, and Tommy Konabagi, Konga Shedan de la Joda Imba Chiparete in and Oda, Tongba Ni said it, Tadaji Gaye the Shuk Chedana, Chebar Tower when you got those. Mezin la luwe nyanga dos. Mezin de tongwa nyi san ta de kong tu da che yor. Ani kong ge da de la tene ngaran zo la da cheda la pa kyobe ki tapshe di jezun jamgung gi shung da de na la da nga zo nam ji rang ju ba sa na mi do shin dong sa na mi do de na shuk che yong wa. Ani tak ta la luwe ki tapshe di mang che ba di tu de che di komul lu du ki kong na ba le ba yin di ni da ume da de zu shung na la shuk rangdong da deni denzu kapsula shuk che yung go re den de da deni ge zo de gangda ngarang zu la norsa ni yo na ni ga le kyobe ge tapshin nang go re ine zaldun de da kon namba ge tu de jesa de dos da ge mi da wa ji ge ji da tak ta la lu ye nyen ga de nyen ga che du gong de de la zadun nang ba re ji de che da la lu ye ge nyen ga de che du gong de la ane nga zu zadun nang da dos ko le na ani konamba chasangi gongba galme du the sambatang to re nyamne che tu re
And so when it comes to the different kinds of teachings we find in specifically Buddhism, the different kinds of, we could call them vehicles, we could call them different traditions. We see actually a lot of similarities when it comes to the, say, the meditation and the conduct. They seem pretty similar. They look quite similar. But there's some differences in the view. And what I mean by that is, I mean emphasis within the view. So what makes these certain kinds of emphases different when it comes to the view of the different traditions, the different kinds of practice lineages, etc.? It comes down to, well, for example, what kind of traditions, different kind of traditions are there? We find different traditions, for example, the Prasangika versus Svatantrika, the consequentialist versus the I'll just call them the Svatantrika in this case. Different kinds of Madhyamaka views. We have the different kinds of views of the self-empty versus other-empty, the Rangtong versus Shintong kinds of views. And so what makes these different kinds of traditions different or have different flavor, for to say? They both well, when it comes to the path, there's two dangers. There's two ways of going wrong when it comes to the path. That is the extreme of eternalism or permanence versus the extreme of nihilism, or we can say annihilationism. And so these are two ways that we can go wrong. These are two places that we can veer off the correct, authentic path. And so how, when it comes to these different traditions, what makes them different is there's certain emphasis on what the most dangerous, what's the most risky thing. For example, let me say, some find that the view, that the mistaken view of nihilism is very dangerous, and that school will emphasize certain teachings that would avoid certain kinds of followers falling into that view, having a mistaken view regarding annihilationism or nihilism. And you have other schools which find the view of permanence to be very dangerous and need to be avoided, and they emphasize teachings that would bring one as an antidote to falling into that view of permanence.
딱다당 제다스네 디그레 이네 아주 고대오지나 니루디 여바레 삼비 짐바 슈근셔와 디라 섬자 체처라 가시 양 가시게 다오다 여바레 저디 섬에 디그 독쇼 메바디 니루레도 삼비 짐바 슈근거와 어디 여바다 메바다 양 아주 딱시 랍디치 때시 인지결 거 가부차로도 유진 니루레 삼바다 메진세.
So when I translate these two terms of takpa and chepa, they can, in the English terminologies, can be a little convoluted and a little heady. So what Khenpo is saying is maybe it's better to think about it in this way. So the view of permanence or of eternalism is actually what we mean by when we say that, is that we think fundamentally or essentially that the reality is existent, solidly existent. It's essentially existent. So that would be the view of permanence. And the opposite of that would be to think that essentially reality is completely absent or non-existent. And that would be the view of nihilism. So when we think about existence versus non-existence, when it comes to the view or of reality itself, is reality truly existent, or is reality somehow essentially non-existent? So these are two views, two extremes that are to be avoided. For example, Nagarjuna, from his perspective, the most dangerous thing that he saw would be, or the most risky thing, the riskiest view was to have essentially think that reality exists. Yeah, and so in order to antidote that, to be a remedy to that, he taught with an emphasis towards emptiness, right? We have the view, the profound view, the profound chariot of the view, which has a strong emphasis on emptiness. Alternatively, authors like scholars and bodhisattvas like Asanga and Maitreya, they found that if the view of emptiness is not correctly understood, if one refutes too much, thinking that they're practicing or are understanding the view of emptiness, if they refute too much, if they go overboard on what it is that needs to be refuted, then there's a danger of them following into the view which thinks that reality is essentially and truly non-existent, or this annihilationism, right? And they'll cling to non-existence. So there's a danger. They emphasize that this could be a great danger, and then the antidote is to teach the view which is more aligned with what we call the Shintong view. Okay, so it's in order to protect against this. It's not so much emphasizing the emptiness quality, but maybe the apparent or appearing quality. And so we have these two going back and forth between different levels of emphasizing an emphasis which is a reaction towards what the authors felt might be the most risky thing for their students. And so from this perspective, we see a difference in the view.
당연히 디 간진이 쉬고에서는 캐남발라 아주 디 칙칙한 당부지도 와 장시디 가르레스 랍나 살동 숭주스는 칙숨도 와 살와세 칙저레 동바세 칙저레 숭주세 칙저레 돈다 숨이를 띠나라 장시디 셈긴고 살동 숭주 디 장시레스 라버와 딘디당 아주 남바 상제베게 람 용수 쪽바다 곰볼루트 당 토메 당 가차장디 소루루 당샤나 디식 나라 뒤되어 그러봐 다디 나니 아주 똑 거에 대 가르레스나 숨바들에 숭죽세시도와 디 마토 용성아 아주 커버를 출대 버려 디 또네 아주 돌고거 다디 똑거 제발라 숭죽레 슬랍샤나 고해가요 말에 깔려하고 싶으셔. 다 어나 가리 숭죽을 해서도 sama 숭세지 니로 와. 니 레스다 가리 레스도 숭디 가리 레스도 살와당 동바레스 대시 잡고 그러 봐. 다디 대시 잡아 잡발라 당 하나도 단다 차라 샤샤고는 아주 남바 상제 바단 하버도 매균 낭데랑 아주 룩스니로 와. 사모타베 룩당 갸친접에서 당 아주 디 룩스니 그 나라 뒤디거 차상 겐루 초니 당 코나마 차상데 다 된나라 사무타비 솔세 디기 가르디시 갸브레스나 식니 바시도와 똥바 세디 가르레 세디 디시 갸방 바레 자든데 제 데니 갸친 쮸비 솔세디 가르디시 갸방 바레스나 제준 잠군 놀면 도메 건조기 솔디기 데니 니바시 당고시도와 웨살와 디시 갸버 당 하나수 똥바레 삼네 짐바이네양 숭주를 랩투가 말해. 와살레 삼베기 꺄마라데바이네 숭주를 랩투가. 랩고사디 숭주세래. 이네야 숭주 랩을 제발다 사와다 똥바 림바신도 대시 꺄네 갈레갈레 도고 그런 마도지기 숭주레스 라바지기 가야 펜토가 말해. 그러와. 제자는 간주다 우마릭 소둑세단 잠주댕아세다 셰달로 구주 니시 망볼 롭종 장거와. 차상데 디코라다 디칙숨디 롭종 장거. 살동 숭주 스토거에 숭주 임바 간식라 디토거 제발라다 사와 가르레 동바레스디니 동바디 차상 고불루르기 당아주 슝데즈나는 말 롭종 장거래 디시캡거래 데니 와사 임베 인수디 잠주댕아 걸어 디시캡 용거 데니 숭주 임바는 저 당아주 악값을 줘 숙성배 봐 딩딩이 디기다 지금 가서 백그라운드 세고 말해 말아주기 지금 차상대 디식나는 뉘디기도 와 이유는 뭐지랑 아주 배제 장애 차상대
So in the seventh verse, we have this first line. And it says, the basis of purification is mind itself, the unity of luminosity and emptiness. So this line talks about the very nature of the mind. And that nature of the mind itself is the basis of purification. And what that is exactly is, as it says here, the unity of luminosity and emptiness. So within the Buddhist context, within the Buddhist path, we have this emphasis, that is, we have this very thing is what is, we could say, summarizes the entire Buddhist path. It summarizes everything that Nagarjuna has said, as well as Maitreya has said. We have these two vehicles: the chariot of the profound view and the chariot of the vast conduct. And so when we can almost divvy up the teachings within the sutra context between these two schools, and everything's spoken about. The very essence of these two schools is applied right here when it says
단디 nganzo ina karse nangbe ki tawa thamje donga tawa thamje ki formula rago dire samdong sungjok se
yes. This is the essential formula which summarizes and sums up the entirety of both the sutra and the tantra view of Buddhism. Just this line, the unity of luminosity and emptiness. This is the essential formula for the entire view of Buddhism. And so, for example, we have these. Let's divvy it up between three words. We have luminosity as the first word, emptiness as the second, and unity. In Tibetan, this is how the grammar is set up. And the third word is the unity. So ultimately, what we need to realize is this unity, right? This is the most important thing we have to realize. This is the goal of the path, to recognize and to know truly and realize what this unity is. If we don't know what this unity is, then we again circle around in samsara. If we do realize what this unity is, that's what we call liberation. And so, but this unity is extremely difficult to wrap our heads around, because the word unity in Tibetan implies this idea of two, a pair. And this pair is the pair of luminosity and emptiness. And when we do, in order to recognize or fully realize what we mean by unity, first we have to understand what this pair is, right? We first have to understand what luminosity is, then we have to understand what emptiness means. And again, in order to teach on this, we have this division between the profound view and the vehicle of the profound view and the vehicle of the vast conduct. And in order to teach that, we have to separate the two. We have to talk about them in a chronological order. We can't talk about them all at the same time, because when it comes to teaching, we have to do things. We have to do things in a chronological kind of style, right? That pedagogy requires this separation of these two things. And so, within the vehicle of the profound view, we learn what emptiness is. Within the vehicle of the vast conduct, Maitreya and Asanga, we figure out and come to understand what we mean by luminosity, right? And so, but if we leave it there, we won't understand what the unity means, right? If we cling to things as empty, just purely empty, essentially, if we cling to emptiness, that's not the unity. We haven't realized what unity means. If we cling to luminosity, the appearance aspect, we haven't understood what unity means. But it's necessary in the beginning to separate these two things, and that's what we mean when we're studying. We have to separate these two things and to understand them separately. For example, within the profound view, the vehicle of the profound view, we have these 6 treatises on logic written by Nagarjuna. This emphasizes the emptiness aspect, right? And then we have the 5 treatises of Maitreya, which emphasizes the luminosity aspect. And so once we understand that, then we come to what we need to understand as the unity. And that unity is what is specifically taught on within the Tantra, within the secret mantra vehicle. And so when we understand it from these 3 words, from this background, we have a good idea of what the teachings imply, and what they're trying to introduce us to when it comes to the unity of luminosity and emptiness.
Namba sanje bin donga ki tatana nga jangshi su tawa ke ji shebe ka wa tawa de kareres ningbu rawji laba ina tini dongani le sha chu gore tawa khaga da mar de ina da chaldung ko ne wa tini tanda di saltong se sto wa saltong se di ta chidang tongba se di dokharang ki kap ki tawa di da changma da gore di ani azu kumbul dudup ki ro lukse dra ba ta deni salwa se di ta dodang nga ki ni bal chamjur bridge tawa ko chega da was 50 feet da gore di jejun jamgon ki tawa dra wa zadun nang go de deni sungju ngwe di da 아니 가두이다 냠len tawa 연구를 가두 냠는 지에서는 가게 값을 넣는 지거를 뒤인데 값을 갖다 살동 송죽세 수미에 변하니 살동 이부디 돌아샤나야 되그래 야나 동바딘 도갑게 tawa 쪼어디 당되니 사와디다 디니 바르기와 체가라고 지다더니 순주세 되다 값수 tawa 점지 많이 뭐 무슨 냠len 지에 그 답시디 나라 요래 도값을라 순죽 순그레 되네다 순죽 태가르도 되니 탑 네는 냠len 지에 된수다 뉴뉴로 와 보다 디숨 나라더니 tawa 순가드 창되긴 수로 없이 요래 두스 ngaki nyambani ki tawa se do anga jo dire nyambani ki tawa se na sungju se de jibare
So the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist path, can be divvied up with respect to the view between the sutric view versus the tantric view. But when it comes to the essence, the main point, the essence of the view of Buddhism, it always comes down to there's different emphasis given within the different teachings within the different sutric and tantric views. However, when it comes down to the very essence of what that is, it's this line of the unity of luminosity and emptiness, right? So we have these two terms of luminosity and emptiness, and for example, emptiness is clearly taught within the sutric view, the sutric teachings, especially by by scholars or practitioners. I don't know what we should call them, but enlightened beings like Nagarjuna, right? Clearly, very, very precisely explained what emptiness means. And that's all can be found within the sutric vehicle. However, when it comes to the luminosity aspect, this is something that is taught both within the sutric as well as the tantric views, and specifically when we want to side more onto the idea of sutric views. We have Maitreya's text, right? Maitreya's text is the bridge between sutra and mantra, and it is so because it emphasizes this idea of clarity, of luminosity, and cognizance. So it rides 50-50 both with the sutric view as well as the tantric view. And then when it comes to the unity itself, the actual application, the actual practice of what we mean by the unity of these two, the unity of luminosity and emptiness, this is clearly and directly in an obvious way taught within the tantric view, right? So we have emptiness, which is emphasized so clearly and expressed so clearly in the sutric view, and then this luminosity aspect, which is kind of the border between sutra and mantra, and then the unity of these two, which is directly expressed, very clearly taught, and and we could say methods are clearly stated on how to practice the unity, is within the tantric view, right? And when we talk about the view of unity, the view of unification of these two, in the more specifically within the tantric view, we use the terminology of
equanimity.
Yes, very good. Yeah, this view of equanimity, or this view of equalness, this great equalness that comes between the aspect of emptiness and clarity. And so this is another way we talk about it within the tantric view.
당이 뒤서 견줄을 가르치는 주거에서는 찍된 간주 계란서다 좁다를 럽주는 장면에는 다디 녀다 망보 가래이나 삼바드니 용색으로 봐. 디 가래 계란서 양도스 낭초 럽주는 장면에는 라과도 등상 간주지 나가주나 vs 아상가 스타드니 망보지 용고도 봐. 지 콘존이 할람지 간주기지 이나 east west 기지 막 잡대서 근데 망보 지운 거다. 근데랑 말에 디는 아주 코라니가기 제든데 카가래 안줄라 고에데 코라니가 고거래 다들 람기 림바당 자든데 제당당 코라니기 되니 지금 안주이나 다 투데낭사 들어와 안주이나 다 지기 딱달라 롱 년가 차도 삼바다 제다다 디 자든데 개발을 또르나 dinsu 람기 림바레 마도 지기 지 versus 된데 말해 와 디 고알레디 내가 좀 붙이자기도 아주 냠는 제베 값을라 디마도 아니 아주 우메숑도 럽전 장도 양 값값라지 미니 쪼바 잡되게 소라오지 코나 용도 와 아니 디 코나 거예요 말해 하고도 전에 당 아주 지준자 미바를 뭐지다 코나 바 차상게 되네 삼로 망보지 땅에 타마게 되니 돔디 되니 숨어다 배자 망보듯이 나라 안 되지 삼당 투바는 아주 냠는 제라 펜도 좀 보용을 했는데도 봐. 디디다 간에 사와 고거 동바 고거래. 라와 또고에도 숭주 또 고거래. 되니 사와 장바 진에 동바 메나야 디게요 말에. 동바 장바 진에 사와 메나야 디게요 말 와. 되니 지기 사와 숭바래 자든 당바래. 지기 동바 자든 당바래. 되고 림바 또도스미다 용거라 왔다. 두스다 공바 갈매도 똑바 세로왕 주. 또 제들랑 애들 주 쉬바 인스.
So why am I emphasizing this? Why am I talking about this? Because I know a lot of you that are listening have studied the different tenet systems of Buddhism, right? The different vehicles, the different views of Buddhism, and when we study the different views, the different vehicles, we can get the sense that there's almost some kind of this view versus that view, right? Or, for example, Nagarjuna versus Asanga, right? They're somewhat like competitors with each other, kind of like what we think of. There's East versus West, yeah. There's this clashing of two parties, right? And they're kind of trying to see who's going to win and who's going to lose, who has the better view or not, right? So, but it's not like that, right? I just want to emphasize that. When it comes to studying
because I have heard that I think someone who studied Buddhist philosophy, and after some time he said that I felt like an innocent child of dysfunctional family. Father being Nagarjuna and mother being Maitreya, I guess.
Yeah, so it can seem like these two views are pitted against each other. Yeah, like a dysfunctional family, and we're kind of in the middle, right? As the child, just kind of watching them argue between each other, right? So it's please don't think of it like that. And why is that? Yeah, I gave the reason that the view of these two vehicles is different only regarding emphasis, right? What either author felt was the most risky danger for their students, risky danger of either falling into the view of clinging to the reality as existent versus non-existent, right? It's purely an emphasis and purely a difference in that kind of emphasis, right? There's also slight differences in how one progresses, the different steps, the stages, or the order of those stages that one takes on the path. But again, it's not a them versus them kind of situation that we have. If we think like that, it can really pose a lot of difficulties to our practice, right? And of course, we see this so much especially within the Madhyamaka teachings of this view versus that view and going back and forth and debating and things like that. But we have authors, for example, like Mipam Rinpoche, who in the end says the final destination is completely the same. He harmonizes the two views. Not that he doesn't harmonize it. He shows the harmony between the two views. He shows the unity between this aspect of luminosity and this aspect of emptiness. And so, when it comes down to it, we can't have one without the other. We have to have two. And the only reason why we have two is just based on emphasis, right? Emphasis of the dangers of falling either into existence versus non-existence, right? So in the end, we have to recognize that there's absolutely no contradiction between these, not only the two views, but the aspects of luminosity and emptiness.
And when you feel like a dysfunctional family child, I can totally understand. I've been there and went through the same difficulties. But you have to understand that this is actually not a mistake. It is intentionally designed that way so that you have a good, proper parents. So you're not going to spoil. Imagine that you have two straightforward grumpy parents. You will have a very hard time. And then imagine you have two very sweet parents. There's a big danger that you might spoil. So Nagarjuna is like a straightforward grumpy father who gives you, everything straightforward, and that's it. And Maitreya is like a very sweet, gentle mother. So imagine when you have these two, there's a high chances that you will be raised very nicely, middle way. So when Nagarjuna scolds you, you can go to Maitreya and say, it's okay, don't worry. And when Maitreya is giving you a lot of chocolate, and you say, oh, everything's too good, and Nagarjuna comes in and say, no, be realistic. Accept the truth. So, in we call it the two approaches. The approach of the profound view, which is Nagarjuna, and the approach of the vast conduct or practice of the Maitreya. And when you have both of them, and the important thing is you have to understand when to go to ask Nagarjuna and when to go to ask Maitreya. If you feel super high, then better to go to Nagarjuna to come down. And when you feel super low, better to go to Maitreya and ask, don't worry, it's okay. So that you will be in somewhere in middle. And this is what we call the middle way. I think to make it easier, Nagarjuna would be like a brain surgery, brain surgeon, and Maitreya would be heart surgeon. So you need both. Yeah? It's good to start with the brain always, but very important to end with the heart. Because many times we start with the brain and somewhere stuck in our neck, it doesn't go to our heart. And that's the way Maitreya comes and say how to work with your heart. And Maitreya, Nagarjuna tells you where to go, and Maitreya will really leads you, like a child, how the mother leads the child, step by step, how to walk. And that's the Maitreya will show you step by step how to crawl, stand up, keep your balance, and then slowly take a step by step. And Nagarjuna is like our eye, and Maitreya is like our leg, and you need both. When you have both of them, then you have a complete path. But I think in Tibetan Buddhism, where traditionally there's a little bit bias towards Nagarjuna. I don't know if it is the realistic before, but it happens around 13th, 14th century, maybe especially after Gyurme. But I'm personally I am a secret admirer of Maitreya, so you will see that my biasness and the rebellions towards the traditional perception of Nagarjuna and Maitreya. Anyway, that dordina mazu saltong sedi tani sungju tu toko gore tani mano mathe bach to barche bala ani sol nikala lobjon chani tani azu sungju tu toko gore es tinega chimbores.
So it is this unity of cognizance or luminosity and emptiness that we have to realize. And in order to realize that in an unerring and authentic and genuine way, we have to study and progress according to these two approaches, right? These two approaches that Khenpo talked about. These two approaches will inevitably lead us to a correct and unerring realization of what this unity means.
당아서 지당 출룩이 등상 출룩 손을 쓰는 당 바이나다 geluk 다와이나다 쪼디 고물루룹 자둔 단계 열어와 당아서 Ka-Nying 마 페시 사자람나 되게 메로 다 쪼디더니 뢰인 이가래 이내양더니 제준 잠건양더니 숙청버지 자둔 지거 냠린 지거래.
We can think about this the so-called dichotomy between these two aspects, even reflected within the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. For example, in the Geluk tradition, there's a heavy emphasis on Nagarjuna, the aspect of emptiness. And within the Kagyu and Nyingma, and we could also probably say the Sakya tradition. Of course, there's an emphasis on both the cognizant and the emptiness qualities, but we have a stronger emphasis, especially within on Maitreya, and this quality of luminosity within the context of practice. And then out of the teachings which emphasize the clarity aspect or the luminous aspect, more emphasis is especially placed on the Gyud Lama for this teaching.
That dinsu nganzu Gyud Lama ki chocha ti wasal yimba tang tani that ti sawa tang tongpa se di tani shwe di bayan di ani nge di chik di ki cha background ro chi shuba yins dinsu kordi.
And so I really wanted to offer this background kind of knowledge, because we're talking about the Gyud Lama right here, right? And within the Gyud Lama, there's so much emphasis on the teaching of what this luminosity, this clear light is, in the context of the unity of luminosity and emptiness.
One thing I like about Maitreya or Sangha's approach is that as they are known as Yogacharya, the means practice oriented approach, and everything is quite down to earth and practical, generally speaking. Of course, there's so many other things, but I think that's quite admirable. Lasso, tatring, tordina, tining anzu nyamling ki shidi, changshidre, tini changshidi, saltung sungju dire, se da dekolange tos, and ding anzu begin nang tena lobjong kandis jangyo res, and dekola ding edeni capjong rab shuba ins.
So today we discussed the foundation of our practice. The foundation of the path is the basis of purification, right? That's the very foundation of our practice. We have to understand what that is, and that is described as the unity of luminosity and emptiness. And so I wanted to give this background when it comes to the study tradition and the academic scholastic tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, in order to really flesh out what we mean by this basis of purification.
Tene ke chumba chikte da nganzu lam yi rimba se di jangma tsamje ki shida nganzu la ngishi ke mare peche tang pa ina de one dane da chue lam du do wa se di chue di dungal se ji pen to du sambe ki tene mituni mangdun drupte da chi inje ke lan to make it more interesting wa process idea kyang ba mai process korang the interesting resha se di so so la ngishi ke ri di ndu da nganzu kang tu du peche tang ro na se de re go shu yes.
And additionally, what we mean by the stages of practice, what does it mean by progress on the path? And I think the most important thing to take from that is that we shouldn't just leave these stages of the practice, the steps of the path, as just kind of conceptual or a conceptual understanding. Alternatively, we have to really apply that, to really engage with these stages of the path, these practices on the path. And as we said, we have to make the Dharma, we have to bring the Dharma onto the path, right? We actually have to, what that means is we have to apply it to our daily experience. And then the very definition of the Dharma being to clear away suffering will be realized, and will recognize and have certainty in what it means to practice the Dharma, what it means, what Dharma actually means. Its very definition will be so much more clear to us when we actually apply the path, right? And so, we shouldn't just leave this process of engaging on the path as just a mere idea, right? We should actually perform it and actually engage in this, and then the result will be a very clear and solid certainty of what it means to practice.
Tengasu jik nyamlin dawa jidi da je ngodo dawa nyamlin je bayna teni nyamlin je chawa thama de ngowa tangsana Oh, thank God it's finally done. So then it's all my machine. Oh, it's interesting. I want to do more like then it's all sleep.
And for example, when we're practicing and we've gone through all the preliminaries, we've gone through the main part of the practice, and we come to finally to the end and we think, thank God, thank God it's over, right? No, please don't think like that, right? Because when we actually apply ourselves to the Dharma, when we engage in the path, the result is that we should find it more interesting, right? And it becomes interesting when we've actually applied it, right? That's the sign, that's the indicator that we've actually applied it. So not just to be relieved when the practice is over, but to really find that when you're dedicating the merit, feeling like, wow, this is actually interesting and I want to know more.
So Janju Semjo Rimboche Mage Banam Ke Gyureche Ke Ba Nyambara Mebaya Gone Gondo Pelvaresho